The abandoned psychiatric hospital stood ominously on the outskirts of the small town. Once a place of healing and hope, it had now become a place of terror and dread. The old building had been left to decay for decades, and its broken windows and crumbling walls only added to its eerie and foreboding presence. As a young journalist, I had always been fascinated by the abandoned hospital. Stories of strange noises and unexplained phenomena had been whispered around town for years, and I was eager to investigate. So, armed with my camera and a flashlight, I ventured into the abandoned building, hoping to uncover its secrets. As I stepped through the front door, the musty smell of old books and decaying wood filled my nostrils. The air was cold and damp, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. The only light came from the weak beam of my flashlight, which cast eerie shadows on the walls. The first thing I noticed was the peeling wallpaper, which hung off the walls in tattered strips. The furniture was old and worn, and the corridors were lined with rusted metal doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I made my way deeper into the hospital, my heart racing with excitement and fear. I had heard stories of patients who had been locked away in the hospital, never to be seen again. I wondered what kind of horrors had taken place behind these walls, what kind of tortured souls had been left to rot in the darkness. As I turned a corner, my flashlight beam fell upon a room that seemed to be in pristine condition. The walls were freshly painted, and the furniture looked new. It was as if this room had been untouched by time, a remnant of a time long forgotten. But then I noticed something odd. The room was completely empty, save for a single wheelchair in the center. As I approached the wheelchair, I noticed a name tag attached to it, Robert Taylor. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of a door slamming shut in the distance. I turned to run, but the wheelchair seemed to be blocking my path. I tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it was rooted to the spot. And then I heard it. The sound of someone breathing. It was faint, but it was there. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. I began to back away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. But then I heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, getting closer and closer. I turned to run, but the wheelchair was still blocking my way. I was trapped. And then I saw him. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man in a white lab coat. He was old, with wild gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He stared at me, his lips twisted into a snarl.
"Who are you?"
"I'm a journalist. I was just curious. I didn't mean any harm."
"You should have stayed away. This is no place for the living."
And then he lunged at me, his hands outstretched. I tried to run, but I stumbled and fell to the ground. He was on top of me now, his hands around my throat, choking the life out of me. But then, just as I was about to black out, he released me and disappeared into the darkness. I lay there for what felt like hours, gasping for air and trying to compose myself. When I finally managed to get back on my feet, I knew I had to get out of there. I stumbled through the corridors, my heart racing, my mind reeling. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the presence of something sinister lurking in the shadows. As I made my way back to the front door, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but there was no one there. I started to run, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. But then I heard a voice, faint but unmistakable. It was the voice of the old man in the lab coat.
You can't leave. No one ever leaves.
I ran faster, pushing myself to the limit, but the voice continued to taunt me, getting louder and more insistent with every passing moment. And then, suddenly, I burst through the front door and into the cool night air. I stumbled down the steps and into my car, shaking with fear and adrenaline. As I drove away from the abandoned hospital, I couldn't help but feel that I had left something behind. Something that was still lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. For weeks after my encounter with the old man in the lab coat, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I had nightmares every night, visions of the hospital and the horrors that lay within. I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, that there was nothing to fear. But every time I drove past the abandoned building, I could feel the weight of its dark history bearing down on me. And then, one night, I received a phone call. It was a woman's voice, shaky and scared.
I need your help. My sister disappeared. She was investigating the abandoned hospital, and now she's gone.
I knew immediately that I had to help her. I had to confront my fears and face the darkness head-on. As I approached the abandoned hospital once again, I could feel the fear rising in my chest. But I pushed it down and stepped inside, determined to find the woman's sister and uncover the truth about the hospital. This time, I was more cautious, more aware of the dangers that lay in wait. I made my way through the corridors, my flashlight beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I heard it. The sound of someone crying. It was coming from one of the rooms down the hall. I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed it open, and there, in the center of the room, was a young woman, her face streaked with tears. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing to her side.
"I don't know what's happening. I was investigating the hospital, and then everything went dark. I woke up here, and I can't get out."
I tried to calm her down, telling her that we would find a way out together. But then I heard footsteps outside the door, and I knew that our time was running out. I pushed the woman behind me, preparing to face whatever was coming. And then the door burst open, and a group of figures emerged from the darkness. They were dressed in white lab coats, and their eyes glowed in the darkness. They were the patients of the hospital, the ones who had been left to rot in the darkness. And they were coming for us. I tried to fight them off, but there were too many of them. They dragged me and the woman down the hall, toward a room that I had never seen before. As we entered the room, I could feel my heart sink. It was the room where the experiments had been conducted. The room where the old man in the lab coat had been performing his twisted rituals. The patients threw us onto the cold concrete floor, their hands reaching out to grab us. I knew that we were doomed, that there was no way out. But then, suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the old man in the lab coat, his eyes blazing with madness.
I told you that you could never leave. You're mine now.
I tried to fight back, to protect the woman who had come to me for help. But the old man was too strong, too powerful. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was back outside the hospital. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew that it wasn't over. I knew that the horrors of the abandoned hospital were still out there, waiting for their next victims. I tried to forget about the experience, to bury it deep in my subconscious. But the nightmares continued, haunting me every night. And then, one day, I received another phone call. It was the woman from the hospital. She had escaped, but she was still haunted by the horrors that she had witnessed. We decided to team up, to confront the darkness once and for all. As we approached the abandoned hospital, I could feel my heart racing. But this time, I was ready. This time, I had a plan. We made our way through the corridors, careful to avoid the patients who still lurked in the shadows. And then we found it. The room where the old man in the lab coat had been performing his experiments. Inside, we found the evidence that we needed. The records of the experiments, the names of the patients who had been subjected to the horrors of the hospital. We knew that we had to get the evidence out, to expose the darkness that had been hidden for so long. But as we tried to leave, we were confronted by the old man in the lab coat once again. This time, he was armed, and he was determined to stop us. We fought back, using everything we had learned to defeat him. And in the end, we emerged victorious. But the darkness of the abandoned hospital still lingered. And I knew that it always would. Years have passed since that fateful night, but I can still feel the weight of the abandoned hospital's darkness bearing down on me. I've tried to move on, to forget about the horrors that I witnessed. But they haunt me still, creeping into my nightmares, lurking in the shadows of my mind. And sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I can feel the pull of the hospital. The urge to return, to confront the darkness once again. But I know that I can never go back. That the darkness of the abandoned hospital is too powerful, too dangerous. And so I continue on, haunted by the memories of the hospital, but determined to never let it consume me again.